Is Hamas a terrorist group? Most people wouldn't struggle with that question. After all, this brutal Islamist organisation, which rules over Gaza with an iron fist, just butchered 1,200 people on the 7th of October. The youngest victims were infants, the oldest were Holocaust survivors. Women were raped, hostages were taken. When former UK Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was asked this question on Talk TV a few weeks back, he couldn't bring himself to utter the T word.
Can we have a discussion?
Can you call them a terror group, Jeremy?
Can we have a discussion?
Can you call them a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion?
Are you prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion with you?
You can't, can
you? Is it possible? Come on, answer that question.
You can't, can you?
You answer it.
No.
Host Piers Morgan invited Corbyn to describe Hamas as terrorists no fewer than 15 times. But he refused. He couldn't. Instead, Corbyn just whittled on about needing to start a process that leads to a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. He has since found the minerals to call Hamas a terrorist group in an article for Tribune. But that would perhaps be more reassuring if it wasn't for his long history of cozying up to Hamas and other Islamist terror groups. In 2009, addressing a public meeting, Corbyn infamously referred to Hamas and Lebanese Islamist Hezbollah as, quote, friends, unquote. He went further, railing against the designation of Hamas as a terrorist group.
And the idea that an organisation that is dedicated towards the good of the Palestinian people and bringing about long-term peace and social justice and political justice in the whole region should be labelled as a terrorist organisation by the British government is really a big, big historical mistake. And I would invite the government to reconsider its position on this matter and start talking directly to Hamas and Hezbollah. That is the only way forward to bring about peace.
And that's not all. In 2011, Corbyn invited Raed Salah, an alleged Hamas fundraiser who believes the Jews were behind 9/11, to tea in Westminster. During a visit to Tunisia in 2014, Corbyn was filmed laying a wreath near the graves of the Palestinian Black September terrorists who murdered Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics. You can see why, after all these sordid details trickled out, Corbyn proved to be such electoral cyanide, helping to deliver Labour's worst election defeat since 1935. But there has been an unhelpful tendency to see Corbyn's dalliances with Islamists as a kind of personal moral failing on the part of him and his hangers-on. The truth is that the rot runs much deeper. Corbyn is just one useful idiot among many on the dregs of the British left, who have come to see Islamism not as the fascistic, terroristic menace that it is, but as a movement at the vanguard of global resistance to a malevolent West. This is the unholy alliance that we've seen out in force on British streets in recent weeks, where Islamists and left-wingers have marched side by side, united in their hatred for Israel and barely batting an eyelid as anti-Semites shout Arabic war slogans and wave Jew-hating placards. Welcome to the Islamo-left, a sinister marriage of convenience that all good people, whether left or right, religious or irreligious, must confront and reject. This story begins with the radical left's abandonment of the working class and its decision to seek out new constituencies and embrace identity politics. From the 1980s onwards, figures on the left perversely came to see working class Brits as a reactionary bloc on progress, while mistaking radical Islamists, among other groups, as a potentially revolutionary force. This coincided with the rise of state multiculturalism, which had the effect of elevating and funding reactionary Muslim community leaders who were falsely presented as the supposedly authentic voice of British Muslims. It is from this ecosystem of a growing Muslim identity politics that the grassroots British Muslim campaign against Salman Rushdie's satanic verses sprung up in the 1980s. Indeed, some of these groups were instrumental in pressuring Iran's supreme leader to issue his infamous fatwa against Rushdie. During the 1990s, sections of the left, the supposed radicals and progressives, became increasingly disturbingly sympathetic to the fundamentalists who continue to rage against Rushdie and his supposedly blasphemous book. Muslim identity politics was particularly appealing to a disoriented left because it mapped onto their support for Palestinian self-determination. Many leftists were prepared to overlook the dark heart of even full-blown Islamists in the interests of backing their supposed struggle against Western imperialism. The Palestinians became merely pawns in some grand conflict between the West and the rebellious global other. This is why today you'll notice that many leftists ignore Hamas's trampling of the rights of the Palestinians and Islamism's usurpation of the Palestinian national cause. Back in 1994, Chris Harman, then editor of The Socialist Worker, the party newspaper of the Socialist Workers' Party, wrote a bizarre but revealing pamphlet entitled The Prophets and the Proletariat. In it, Harman admitted that Islamism has some pretty fascistic qualities, from its opposition to modernity to its murderous intolerance and its brutal treatment of minorities, which is all very good of him. But the Islamists aren't all bad, he concluded. Islamists, Harman wrote, had opposed the state and elements of imperialism's political domination, particularly Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and Hamas in the West Bank and Gaza. In this, he presented Israel as little more than a Western imperial outpost. And so Islamism, Harman concluded, is born of a, quote, feeling of revolt that could be tapped for progressive purposes, unquote. Failed Western revolutionaries were increasingly keen to outsource radical agency to Islamists and to whitewash these reactionaries as a progressive force. This marriage of convenience was then consummated in the 2000s, in the aftermath of 9/11 and amid the war on terror. In 2002, the Stop the War coalition, dominated by the Socialist Workers' Party and the Communist Party of Britain, formed an alliance with the Muslim Association of Britain. Both Stop the War and the MAB had a pronounced presence on the anti-Iraq war protests of the early 2000s, and both groups are among the most prominent organisers of the quote-unquote pro-Palestine demos that have recently been roiling London. The Muslim Association of Britain might sound benign, but it was founded by none other than Mohammed Sawalha, a former Hamas chief who now lives in London. His son is its vice chair. Over the years, leading figures from Stop the War have been pretty open about their fondness for Hamas. One of Stop the War's co-founders, John Rees, once dubbed these anti-Semitic terrorists a, quote, legitimate resistance movement, unquote. At a Stop the War conference in 2006, Lindsay German, a leading SWP figure, said, quote, whatever disagreements I have with Hamas and Hezbollah, I would rather be in their camp. Democracy in the Middle East is Hamas, is Hezbollah, she said. Followers of the conflict will know that there hasn't been an election in Hamas-run Gaza since 2006, when German made that ridiculous speech. Jeremy Corbyn was, of course, chairman of the Stop the War coalition from 2011 till 2015, when he became Labour leader. German served as his vice chair. Stop the War consolidated the fledgling relationship between sections of the hard left and actual Islamists. In doing so, it also faithfully undermined many of the things that used to be essential to being left-wing, such as universalism, reason and humanism. Anti-imperialism was reduced to little more than anti-Westernism, transforming regressive Islamists from Iran or Gaza into anti-colonial heroes in the process. And all this has fueled identity politics here in the UK, transforming us from citizens with interests in common into members of competing ethno-religious groups. In particular, this anti-war left and their Islamist allies have cultivated a divisive Muslim identity politics. Their cynicism paid off at the 2005 general election, when Respect, a Stop the War spin-off party led by George Galloway, won the East London seat of Bethnal Green and Bow, which has a large Muslim population. It was a triumph of militant anti-Westernism and pork barrel identity politics. These malign trends have since spread to the broader bourgeois left. Take Novara Media, a popular Corbynista YouTube channel and website run by a group of perennial postgraduates. In 2014, the Novara website published a glowing profile of Mohammed Daif as part of a Radical Live series. It described him as an uncompromising and shrewd freedom fighter who has contributed to the impressive evolution of the resistance in Gaza. Daif is the commander of Hamas's military wing and a vicious Islamist. 9 years after Novara's Puff piece was published, he became one of the architects of Hamas's brutal incursion into southern Israel earlier this year. No wonder that one of Novara's editors, Rivka Brown, hailed the events of the 2nd of October as a, quote, day of celebration for supporters of democracy and human rights worldwide. After Hamas launched its brutal pogrom in Israel, many were shocked at the apologism and even cheerleading that some on the British left engaged in. The Socialist Worker, the paper once edited by Chris Harman, greeted the massacre with the headline, Rejoice. But while we certainly had a right to be shocked at such inhuman and depraved talk, we probably shouldn't have been surprised. For decades now, Britain's radical left has been morally self-immolating. Its deranged alliance with Islamists has stripped it of any claim it might once have had to the moral high ground. So now, weekend after weekend, we see supposed anti-racists and anti-fascists march alongside people chanting for the ethnic cleansing of Jews from Israel. They can dress this up as resistance or anti-imperialism all they want, but it really is nothing of the sort. These supposed left-wingers have embraced barbarism. They've got into bed with bona fide fascists. Identity politics has rotted their brains and their souls.